Family, what's good? Y'all come on in. Come on in. Come on in. It's Friday. Been a long week. Y'all come on in here and talk to me. Listen, we it's been a long week, man. I posted something earlier today and I was like, in education, this has been the longest week of the entire school year. Like this week has been just bananas. It's been crazy. Right? I don't know if it's because spring break was last week or whatever it was. It's been a long week. And this week had me thinking about some things. That's why I got y'all in here. I want y'all to come think. Come on in. Come on in. I'm thinking about the fact that sometimes you just gotta know when to shut up. You know, we live in a culture where we gotta talk all the time. We gotta get the last word. We gotta get our point across. It doesn't matter how it makes other folk feel. It doesn't matter if it's productive or counterproductive. Um, we're just always in a state of having to talk all the time, having to give a response, having to give a rebuttal. And this week just had me thinking about that. You know, sometimes you have to know when to talk, when to be silent, when to be quiet, when to respond, and when it's important for you to just listen. And that's what I'm thinking about. That's what I'm thinking about. Y'all come think out loud with me through this whole concept of knowing when to keep your mouth closed and when to speak. You know, earlier this week I saw something that was posted. Something happened to someone, and they were posting about it. Something happened to their loved one, and they were posting, and it was getting a lot of traction on social media. And people were responding and tagging and sharing, and there was a lot going on, right? And someone asked me my opinion, and I just refused to answer because I didn't have enough information to give a quality response. And so sometimes it's incumbent upon us to know when we need to give a response and when we need just shut up. Because social media will have you chasing things and believing things and questioning things and all in an uproar about things, and then you find out that it wasn't the way it was portrayed, and you're so quick to give a response when oftentimes, my boy, oftentimes it's more powerful to keep your mouth closed. What's up, Kate? Kate, you need to come on here. Hit that link. Come on in here, man. Yeah, it's sometimes it's just more powerful. Sometimes it's just more intelligent to keep your mouth closed. You gotta know when to shut up. You know, this thing is relational too, right? So, you know, in your relationships, whether or not it's a marriage, your spouse, or your kids, your parents, you know, you don't have to respond to everything. See, that's why some of us we can't keep a job now. that's why some of us go to work stressed every day. Not because the job is hard, but because people are difficult. And then when you get in that mode of dealing with difficult people, the problem is you don't know when to keep your mouth closed. You got to respond to every negative thing. And so sometimes you just got to shut up. And that's what I'm thinking about this week. It's just so much happened that sometimes you just got to shut your mouth. You know, Abraham Lincoln says this. He says it's better to remain silent and be thought a fool than to speak and remove all doubt. In other words, sometimes it's more beneficial to your reputation to keep your mouth closed than it is to speak. I heard this guy say this. This is one of my colleagues, James Walker. He's a speech pathologist, and he says this all the time. People judge your intelligence by how you articulate yourself. And so oftentimes we engage in conversation that we shouldn't engage in. We're so quick to give an opinion. We're so quick to let somebody hear what we're thinking. We're so quick to give somebody a piece of my mind. And you find out later, after doing that so many times, that your character and your reputation has been shaped by the words that keep coming out your mouth. And your reputation and your character might be so much better if you learned when to keep your mouth closed. You don't have to give a response all the time. You know, sometimes silence is the loudest answer. Let me say that again. Sometimes silence is the loudest answer. Because silence creates anticipation. I remember Denzel saying in, I think it was American Gangster. Y'all seen American Gangster? Denzel said this. He said, the loudest one in the room is typically the weakest one in the room. And what was he saying? Sometimes you have to move in silence. And in this social media age that we live in, we've got to post everything that's going on in our life. You got to post where you ate, what time you woke up, how you felt when you woke up. You posting everything. And sometimes anticipation and intrigue never happens because you're so busy running your mouth. Pecan Tan says because people are listening to respond and not to understand. You know, we say that a lot. But how often, when we're called into those situations, do we really listen to understand what somebody's saying? I mean, let's scale that back just a little bit. How often do we really listen? You know, me and my wife who had a conversation a few days ago, and I told myself in my mind, I said, you know what, I'm gonna just listen. I'm gonna just listen. And about 2 minutes in, I had to open my mouth and start talking. See, it's so easy for us to understand how detrimental the lack of silence is, but it's so hard for us to implement it. You know, sometimes silence is the loudest answer. And sometimes you have to know not only when to respond, watch this, but you got to know how to respond. And wisdom teaches you not only when, but it teaches you how. And a critical piece of relational intelligence, or knowing how to deal with other folk at your job, in your house, in your family, is simply knowing when to shut your mouth and listen. Or sometimes you don't even have to listen. Sometimes you just don't need to open your mouth and respond. So it's an intriguing concept. I was thinking about this week. You know, I read something a few days ago that said over 90% of learning in adults happens when we're not busy talking. Let that sink in. Over 90% of learning in adults happens when we're not busy talking. Like how much silent time do you really have in your daily life? You know what I'm saying? Like, you get in the car, what you do? You got to hit XM radio. Groove. Groove is my station. You got to cut the radio on. You get out of the car, you get to work, it's loud all day. You get back home, you get out of work, get in your car, you got to have that radio on. You get home, the TV's on. You get into bed, the TV's on. There's never any point in your life where there's some silence. And perhaps that's why we don't grow. Because learning happens in silence. Learning happens in growth happens when we're not so busy talking, but we're busy thinking. That's a concept, and it's a Friday night, so I don't want to go into deep concepts. That's a concept called metacognition. When you're thinking about your thinking, that quiet time, that silent time, is where you really grow. That silent time is where you really understand how to move. And you're so busy talking, you're so busy with all of the noise that's going on in your life. You're so busy, period, that you don't recognize that I'm never learning and I'm never growing because I have a problem with silence. I have a problem with keeping my mouth closed. I have a problem with responding to everything. And it creates this dynamic in your life where you're just stuck. Because you're never in a position to grow and learn, because you always feel like you have to be the one initiating conversation. Listen, no, not everything needs a response or reaction, and that's so hard in our social media culture. That's so hard because we see something, we gotta like it or love it, or I don't know all the different social media things. We gotta respond to it. We gotta comment. No. Sometimes you gotta learn to know when it's not time for you to say anything. Sometimes you gotta keep scrolling. And the culture, the world has this tendency to want to create narratives, and it uses social media to do that. And so if you're always looking at social media with the understanding that you want to respond to everything you see or you believe everything you hear, then you create a dynamic where you can't grow. And you're so addicted to what you see and hear, not understanding that it's a tool to create a mindset in you, good or bad. Mental clarity. In therapy, we teach people to schedule this quiet. Yeah, you got to schedule time to be quiet. Like most of the time for me, that's in the car on the way to work, on the way back from work. I try to schedule it other times when I'm home, but most of the time is when I'm in commute somewhere. And that silent time will expose what you really believe about yourself. That silent time, and again, I'm just thinking out loud. It exposes what you believe about yourself. When you get into silence, you begin to really have to think about how you think. You have to ask and answer questions about yourself and to yourself that you can't do when all the noise is going on, right? Silence is critical. It's important. I learned that this week. Sometimes you just don't have to respond. And sometimes people will bait you into a response. Sometimes people will bait you into a response. And we think we're so strong. I'm not going to say nothing. I'm not going to say anything. We think we're so strong until we get put in that situation where somebody you don't like has baited you into a response. And it's not till afterwards when you look back, you be like, man, they got me. They got me. It happened one day this week. It's a situation where trying not to give too much information, but it's a situation where there was a parent, and she was talking to the coach, and the coach was just trying to hold it together, but she just kept coming at him. And what she was saying was not wrong, but it was the way she was saying it, and it was the environment. She had an audience, and she just kind of baited him, and he tried to hold it together until he couldn't hold it no more. And he kind of went off. And what I'm sure he understands now is that, number one, that was set up for him to lose his control. Secondly, he probably lost some level of respect with other parents that were there because he allowed himself to be baited into a conversation that didn't have to happen had he figured out that this is the time that I need to be silent. My boy, Sherrod, man, if you're in Aiken, South Carolina, you need some cakes, bake, some cookies, all of that. Sherrod got you. He's the GOAT of that. Man, I can't tell you how many times I've seen something on a post and kept scrolling. Everything doesn't require a response. That's exactly right. And how many, I can't tell you how many times I see something on the post and didn't keep scrolling. And should have kept scrolling. Now, this was years ago, though. Man, I used to get into it with people all the time on social media because I just felt like people are on social media and they really want to hear my opinion. They don't. They don't. They post what they post, and a lot of times they post what they post to trigger you. They're smart. They really don't care about what you think about it. They just want to trigger you. They get something out of it. I've seen posts, and one of my friends is good at this. Like, he'll say something, so he'll take some sports tape. My boy, he might watch this, Snacks. He'll take some sports tape that is ridiculous. Like, the New York Knicks are going to win the NBA championship, right? He'll take some sports tape. That's ridiculous. And then he'll watch all the comments up under it, and he won't even comment no more about it. There it is. If you're in Aiken, Saki Sweets. My boy Sherrod. Good man, too. Great man. Great guy. And so social media sometimes it sets you up to fail. It sets you up to respond when you need to keep your. And the problem with social media is that once you say something crazy, it's up there. You can delete it. Somebody screenshotted it already. It's up there. And it's critical that you're careful about that. So it's one thing too, when you start thinking about relationships, when you start thinking, and I say this all the time, when I talk about relationships, I'm talking about relationships, not just marriage, not just girlfriend, boyfriend, all relationships, co-workers, all of that. Silence gives you control. Because staying silent instead of responding with emotion gives control. And this is definitely different for men and for women, right? Because nobody wants to see an out of control, overly emotional man. They just don't. And so in relationships, when you know how to keep silent and not respond in negative situations, it actually empowers you. It not only does it empower you, it keeps you calm. It keeps you intentional. Right? My wife is my wife is great at that. Conversation get thick, she stop. And what it does is it has me thinking, did I say something wrong? Maybe it was the way I said it. And now I'm reflecting on how I communicate, which causes me to become a better communicator, which hopefully causes that intense conversation to go better the next time. But that all starts with her silence. I see you comment. You need to go and hit that link and come on in here. Most people on social media don't post to learn or be open-minded. They post for validation or to troll, trigger people, and cause confusion. I agree with that. That's deep now, but I agree with that. I think I was foolish years ago getting into conversations. My daughter texted me. She graduate 5th grade soon, and she texted me all these shoes she want. She's a trip. So I lost my train of thought now. I used to respond to folk thinking they really cared about my opinion, or they were open-minded. Most people who post something, they already believe what they post, and you're not going to sway them any kind of way on social media, even if you're right. And even if they know you're right, they're not going to change their opinion because they didn't post it for your validation or for your opinion. They didn't post it to be open-minded. Most people. They want people to jump on their bandwagon and validate what they already believe, even if it's wrong. I very rarely had productive disagreement on social media. It just very rarely happens. Sometimes the most powerful Friday, I can't read tonight, thing you can say is absolutely nothing. That's true. And so we've got to learn and got to know, and this week kind of taught me, you got to know when to open your mouth. Silence gives you control. Silence makes people listen to you. Let me say that again. Silence makes people listen to you. Why is that? Because silence or constantly talking reduces the impact of what you're saying. See, when you're a person that constantly talks, what tends to happen is the impact of what you say loses its power. Think about that grandma you had. Think about that great aunt that you had, right? Think about that granddaddy that you had that didn't talk much, but when they said something, everybody listened. They didn't just listen because they was grandma and granddaddy. Now, that's one of the major reasons. But they listened because grandma and granddaddy don't talk that much. So when they opened their mouth to say something, you knew it was something that was pertinent to your life. You knew it was something that was impactful, something that was powerful, because they weren't constantly talking. And when you're constantly talking nonsense, it reduces the impact of what you're saying. Talking about exercise your silence. The shoes are expensive. Yeah, they are. Silence makes people listen to you. Speaking less allows your words to carry more weight. People pay attention to people who are not always talking. My boy, Bishop Demetrius do. And so that's critical, and that's powerful. People will pay more attention when you're a person of few words, but those few words are powerful words. I read something at one point this week, and now I can't remember who the president was, but I think it was talking about one of them old presidents, and it said that every time he would walk to the podium to speak, he would pause and just let the room be silent. Then he would grab his pen or his pencil or whatever, and he'll start talking and then he'll stop. Every time he did the same thing. And he said what it created in people was an anticipation, because silence is often uncomfortable. It created an anticipation. Let me lock in and hear what is this man about to say? And in our lives, your words have power and impact, and they're more impactful when you don't use them all the time for everything. Your words have power. That's why when someone is nearing death, you lock into what they're saying closer, because you know they have less words to say. Sometimes silence makes people listen to you. Y'all see that shirt? That's Winthrop. Rock Hill, talk to me. I'll be there this weekend, next weekend, weekend after that. AAU basketball with the kids. So silence not only makes people listen to you. Silence reveals other people to you. See, when you stop talking, people fill up that space. They start talking. And your silence allows other people to reveal their true character, their true thoughts, and their true intentions. See, if you want to learn a person, be quiet enough to hear them talk about themselves. Be silent enough to let them keep talking enough to show you who they are. So you can't hear the revelation of somebody else's character when you're so busy talking and not listening, not being silent. You just got that new boyfriend, a new girlfriend, a new husband, a new wife, whatever, and you trying to learn that person, but you can't learn that person when you're doing all the talking. Silence allows you to learn the character of that person. You start a new job, you got a new coworker, let them talk, and you be silent. You'll quickly find out if they messy, if you need to distance yourself from them, if there's somebody that's going to help you go to the next level. Listen, silence is often filled with answers, wisdom, and the ability to hear more. The quieter you become, the more you can hear. Absolutely. And so people will reveal themselves to you when you get silent and you just let them keep talking. And see, you complaining about a person who was trying to tell you who they were, but you couldn't shut your mouth. You done been in that relationship for 10 years with a person who told you on day 3 who they really were, but you couldn't keep your mouth closed long enough to really hear and process and analyze what they were saying. Maybe that's the problem in our relationships, is that it's too much talking and not enough listening. Not enough silence so that we can understand people. You know, that's a dilemma right now. When you start talking about political things, and you got Donald Trump on this side and the liberal Democrats on this side, and black people and white people and all these different types of people going on. Everybody talking and nobody's listening, because we have a preconceived notion about how things should be, or what we should believe, or what we should think, but we don't take time to just be silent and listen. And what I think you would find out with a lot of people, not all, and maybe even not most, but what you'll find out with a lot of people is you have more in common with them than anything, but you can't shut up enough to listen to them. You know, that creates conflict. Silence actually prevents unnecessary conflict. PK Tan said this earlier. Not every comment or criticism deserves a response. And so when you're so quick to respond to somebody, oftentimes the conflict that is created is unnecessary. Because if you would have kept your mouth closed, there would be no conflict. I think that's why the old folk used to say you got 2 ears and 1 mouth. So you should listen twice as much as you talk. That's why the Bible says, be quick to hear, slow to speak, slow to anger. Unnecessary conflict is a byproduct of responding when you could be quiet. When that happens, it creates something called regret, right? And you respond so quickly that you didn't process what you were going to say and the way you should say it in that moment, and you end up regretting it. Silence can keep you from regret. I just think that's so powerful. Like silence, knowing when to keep your mouth closed, is something that you can be 60, 70, 80 years old and you still hadn't learned how to do that. Because this is something that there are certain topics that trigger you, that make you feel like you got to respond. There are certain people that trigger you, that make you feel like every time they say something, you got to respond. There's certain activities that trigger you. And whereas you may have mastered it in one area, you hadn't mastered it in all areas. And you're not slow to speak. You're not quick to hear. You're quick to respond. Silence also does something else. It creates wisdom and reflection. You know, one of the most critical and important things that you can do is be quiet enough to reflect on a few things. I think you have to be quiet enough to reflect on your past. I think you have to be quiet enough to reflect on your character. And I'm just thinking out loud. I think you also have to be quiet enough to reflect on your future. Or maybe not your future, on the things that you've done to progress you to where you're trying to go. And a lot of times you can't do those things when there's so much noise, so much talking. Let me hurry up and get out of here. Silence gives you time to think, observe, and gain perspective. You ever thought about why you keep getting in arguments with your husband, with your wife, with your boyfriend, with your girlfriend, with your brother, with your sister, with your coworker? Maybe it's because you're not spending enough time thinking about their way of thinking, their perspective. One thing that I've found and realized over these 88 years of my life is that the best decisions come after silence and reflection. Let me say it again. The best decisions come after silence and reflection. So maybe you're consistently making bad choices. Maybe you're consistently making bad decisions in your life. And maybe it is a result of a lack of silence and reflection. Maybe it's a result of you always responding with words and not thoughts. Maybe you need to spend more time trying to understand how your wife thinks than trying to respond to everything she said. Maybe if you took the time to try to understand the perspective of your boss, you might realize she ain't as crazy as I thought she was. But those things can't happen in the noise. And in our world, our American westernized culture is all about noise. It's all about speaking. It's not about reflection. There's a story about a man back in the 1940s who came over. He was like a prominent minister in the East, and he came over on a boat. You know, back then they'd take you on, they didn't have flights and everything. He came over on a boat, and he got off the boat. And the story says that when he got off the boat, he stepped foot in America, and he told the people with him, we're going to get back on the boat because these people will never hear us because they're so busy. Think about that. It didn't take him long to realize that we are so busy with noise and everything that's going on in our life that we can't hear any perspective that may be different than ours because we're too busy talking and trying to get our thought process, trying to get somebody else to see, hear, and believe what we do. Sometimes you gotta know when to shut up. That's what I learned this week. You gotta know when to shut up. Let me tell you something. When you're dealing with your kids, you better know when to shut up too. Because you'll say some stuff to your kids that you'll regret later. Because sometimes it'll be 5-10 years later where something happened in your child's life and they'll go back to that one moment you were mad and you said the wrong thing to them in that moment. And that moment shaped something in their life in a negative way. And you'll say, well, you know what? My parents used to talk to me like that all the time. Different time, different mental capacity. You got to be careful how you use your words. Maybe we'll think through that next week. You got to be careful how you use your words. You got to be careful what you say, how you say, when you say, to whom you say. And that's what I want you to think about this week. That's what I've been thinking about this week. And I want you to think about that. How can I learn to keep my mouth closed? How can I learn to be quiet, to be silent, to work on my metacognition, thinking about my thinking facts, not just what you said, but how it made them feel. That's it. That's it. That's it. Sometimes I'll say things to people, my students at school. Man, I love them kids. But sometimes I'll say something to them and it'll crush them. And then I'll come back and say something funny and they'll bust out laughing. You know, you gotta know how what you're doing is impacting someone else. And sometimes you get that, watch this, before you do it. But sadly, you don't really understand its impact until afterwards. It's like that quote, life is lived forward, but only understood backwards. It's in retrospect that you really understand how you need to process your life, process your silence, process your words, right? And when you begin to understand how to process it, ideally, you should make better decisions moving forward. That's what I've been thinking about this week. You got to know when to shut your mouth, when to just listen, when to understand the power of your words. And your words have more impact when you think about what you're going to say and you say it, and that's all you say. You don't keep rambling on and end up saying something you regret. That's why difficult conversations and arguments go wrong, because they last too long. Say what you got to say, shut your mouth and listen. That's hard to do. Why? Because you got to have the last word. You got to make sure they understand how you feel. They going to get this work. They going to learn today. Be quick to hear. Slow to speak. Slow to anger. It's Dr. Williams. Thinking out loud. Sometimes you just need to shut up. Till next time.